All right, so I have a little bit of tea with me. I have some string cheese. This is what you need in order to build a dungeon in D&D, except not really, but it helps. And that's tonight's goal, right? We made an NPC, and we made 2 villains last night. And one of those was a villain that might not be the main villain, but was still hooked into the overall story through a familial connection to the leader of the Confederacy of this area that we've been building. Long day hoping dinner settles. I hope so too, Diadems. I hope you can just kick back, relax, and just enjoy your time. And so we had some prompts that were carrying over from last session into this that I can always go back and explain if you say, well, how did we get this? With that as the background, I want to go through some of the steps that you can find in the DMG and out of it too, for you to find some inspiration to make dungeons yourself if you ever feel that you're stuck and you want to run the dungeons part of Dungeons and Dragons. So, in here, as part of a campaign building process in the DMG, you can find a lot of information just in paragraph form, or when it comes to giving yourself prompts in order to come up with some random elements, either for inspiration or you just need something in a hurry. There you go, instead of a long thought out ordeal. For our dungeon, I want to follow a similar process and highlight the creation of a dungeon, and even talk a little bit about the practicalities of running in a dungeon too, in your own games, whether they're heads up at your dinner table or it's online through webcams or microphones. For what we're doing here, what's our dungeon goal? Actually, I'll just put the colon here. Now, look, to win, right? We want to win. We want to conquer the dungeon or find the treasure or beat the boss. And those are solid, obvious choices. Could there be a side goal? Could there be, here's something you can do, but really this is a goal to achieve. Let's roll a d20 and find out more than just navigating and surviving the maze, beating the boss, and then you're done. What else is there's something in here to consider? We rolled a 20. Oh, all right. Roll twice, ignoring the results of 20. 19 and 8. Okay. Hide from a threat outside the dungeon. And 8 is rescue a captive. Oh, hey. This could be really spicy. I think we can do a lot with this, right? Now, you may recall from last night, or if you're watching this in the video series later in the future, hopefully I'm still alive and well when you're watching this. The setting was, it is ruled over by an undead who is an ancestor to the current leader of this Arctic Swamp Confederacy. And he loves gambling, and that was actually his curse. So much so that even in the unlife, he died when this dwarven city sank into the swamps, and yet there he goes, roaming the halls, lonely, or maybe people find him every so often, and he's just compelled to offer them a challenge and to gamble in hopes of one day actually being defeated. Maybe he wants to be defeated. Maybe he actually wants rest. He wants to sleep. And he just can't seem to stop winning because of some luck curse. And I say luck curse because You know what? When you should have died and you don't, it's probably pretty exciting. And then for the next 500 years, when there's no one to talk to and nothing else happening, and you find that your mind is slipping or your behaviors are altering or you're no longer the person you were, was it really worth it? So here, we can go back and say, well, if we have to rescue a captive, who's the captive? Do we need to generate another NPC, or can we rope in an NPC that we already know? And for the threat outside the dungeon, this could very well be the other villain or an agent of that villain. Or don't forget that a threat does not have to be a person. Something can happen where maybe there's a big storm rolling in that can even suppress the warmth given off by this very active geothermal location. And so, you know, yeah, it's like oh shoot, what's that disaster movie? Like the end of tomorrow or something like that, where the world is like freezing over and maybe there's an ice storm or something, and they have to duck into a place in order to avoid the worst of the storm until it passes and the natural warmth of the swamp continues to heat things back up. We can go through, and also if you want to make more NPCs, there are adventure allies, adventure patrons, you know, people who will set you on this quest as well. Your adventure introduction, by the way, again, the book will hold your hand through a lot of this. And you know what? What are your players going to know? Just because you've taken a random idea and you've customized it to a story you want to tell, what are they going to say? Oh, well, you use the DMG. I'm not playing in this game. Nah, you're fine. If you need inspiration, find inspiration. Find it in a novel. Find it in a religious text, a history text. Find it in a movie or a comic. Find it in the DMG. That's why we're here and what we do. All right. So, and we're going to go through this process tomorrow for our final broadcast of the week when we're making a campaign. Mysteries, intrigue, there's a lot of stuff here. You want to frame events. You know, it's the birth of a child, a civic festival, a holy day. Plot twists. I'll touch on random encounters when it comes to a dungeon, but that's going to be one of the last things that I want to go over, because I want to talk about the concept of a dungeon and how you build it and what it is. Um, all right, so we have this basic setting, and we can look at the table in the very back here. Sorry, let me get you this specific page. Here we are. Random dungeons. Do you have a notepad and some dice? You can make a dungeon as you go along. I've done this. I've sketched and plotted, and you know, I spent a month to craft a dungeon for my players to go through over the course of an evening or two. Um, And I've also just done the by the seat of my pants dungeon creation. You know, things just occur as they are in order to tell the story. You know, because maybe I want to open myself up for some randomness as well, which can be a good check on you as a DM. If you don't want to, if you don't want to murder your players, if you got to put yourself at the mercy of dice rolls, it can help keep you humble. Now, for this, for the purposes of what we're doing here, I am not going to be rolling every door, the width of every hallway. You know what kind of what kind of door, what's beyond it, what kind of dimensions of a chamber. I'll leave that to you. We're going to talk about the concepts of the dungeon and what we want to accomplish inside of it. But if you want to go for the minutia, you can generate it with random rolls out of the book. You can go to Donjon, Donjon, and that has a random dungeon generator that if you put in a couple inputs about how large do you want it, what kind of a dungeon, you want it to be difficult and such, it'll give you encounters, it'll give you a map. It's great. So just realize that this information is back here on 290 and beyond. And it would be nothing more than rolling, okay, so here's my starting entrance. Note. All right, now there's how many exits? Okay, 2. And then at the end of 1 is this chamber, and then a door. And if you're not sure yourself, let this do the work for you. And if you want some particular flavor, instead of just saying, well, it's a 20 by 30 room. Okay, so what? Well, is this dungeon a lair? A maze? A mine? A planar gate? Is it a stronghold? Is it a temple or a religious shrine? A tomb? A treasure vault? Or if you want just some general chambers that you'd find in a dungeon. You know, a sitting room, a smithy, a stable, a study, a temple itself, right? Like, we're talking the overall dungeon, not just the minutia of foot by foot. The current state of the chamber, which, by the way, you can leave clues in your dungeon as to what happened by just that. Is everything dusty and it looks like it hasn't, rotting and unattended? That'll give clues. Is everything very fastidious? There's no dust, and yet this isn't a sealed chamber. Someone might be down here, or something that's cleaning up after itself. Different contents, including monsters. The monsters can have motivation. If you pick up a DMG, please give it a scan. It is all right here for you. Traps with various triggers, and how severe is it? Because traps are a tried and true method of increasing the anxiety level inside of a dungeon. And the DMG only gives you a couple sample traps. And the reason for that is traps are rather simple. Use your imagination. We'll get to it. There's just a very basic guideline in creating your own traps or modifying ones that exist by scaling it a certain way. Tricks, dungeon dressing. You hear a moaning, a scratching or scrabbling. You can, as you're going through the dungeon, the door opens and you hear a squeaking. That might indicate that rodents or something are around. Do you see how in-depth you can make this as the human computer? And you can spend a month to craft something randomly and have notes about what sounds are heard in every room, the smells, the contents of everything. You have it inventoried, even though it might just be broken furniture. That might not be content, or you might not be content. Instead of just saying broken furniture, you say it appears to be a broken table and one broken chair. Because elsewhere in this same chamber, you say that it looks like there's two beds. Maybe it's like a prison cell. There's two beds, and it looks like there's dining service for two. You find two trays with two bowls clattered. Now, can someone eat on their bed? Probably. But this would, if you're presenting clues in this fashion, you might have a player say, whoa, okay, hang on. So everything about this large, like, prison cell or something says that it looks like two people coexisted inside this room. And the furniture is smashed, and there's only one chair, even the remains of only one chair. What happened to the second chair? Could that be relevant? Could that be a part of your story? You don't have to overthink your dungeons and plan everything out to that nth degree. But you can. And you can do it yourself, and you don't even need this book, but you know what? This book will definitely give you a heads up on being able to do that. But you as a human being who's experienced life can do this stuff as well. Odors, general features, ashes, bones, broken bottle, a broken sword blade, teeth or fangs that are scattered around. All of this stuff. They find a mage's room. Here you go. Here are things that you could find in a mage's room as suggestions. Books, scrolls, tomes, containers. If you're creating a biome, right? We live in an Arctic swamp. Owls, bandits, orogs, polar bears, saber-toothed tigers, remoras could be found in here. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of the dungeon. Anyway, so we have our dungeon goal. The PCs are going to have to hide from a threat outside of the dungeon and rescue a captive that they're going to find inside the dungeon. Maybe for a similar reason. You know what? That same vagrant that they met out on the streets could very well be the person that they end up rescuing. And I bring that up, right? So we come over here to, right? He paints beautifully. He doesn't really have a home, so he floats around. And you know what? He might have even found, because he doesn't live in a traditional fashion. With all the construction going on, there could be access inadvertently down to the ruins beneath the city, and he might have on the entry into this location at whatever level 1, whatever the starting level is, they might have met this vagrant and he just came across as such. You know, gave him a couple clues like, yeah, go eat here. You know, watch out for this area, they'll rip you off or whatever. You know, he's honest, right? Look at his interactions. He paints beautifully. And that's a clue that you can drop, because then when they're in the dungeon for an extended period of time to wait out the storm, they might find that he does indeed paint beautifully, and he ends up finding comfort with another lost soul. One who is dead, who draws beautifully. And what about this? Just because someone can paint beautifully doesn't mean they can draw beautifully. And it could even be discovered in the course of this dungeon that this vagabond may have been stealing the drawings, or may have just entered into an agreement. I'll come down here, and I will peddle your drawings. I'll paint them and I'll sell them, and then I'll come back and I will give you I'll give you money. Because that's what this person was after, right? They're a gambler. There was some sort of a greed or an addiction. And so they find that, maybe something went wrong. And that something that went wrong is maybe if he was stealing drawings, then the ghost finally caught him doing so. Or the skeleton or the zombie or the revenant or whatever you want this undead to be. Hey, Kreddle. Oh, like a James Bond kind of figure. And hey, Darkwolf also. Hanging with your friend and sister. You want to stop and say a woo? Well, a woo to you. You've been playing a lot of games. Well, I hope you've been having fun. And if you can make it out for the module on Saturday or Sunday, I will be running this at the store. And you can see how all of this is continuing to build into the very organic structure of this region. When you as a DM are putting forth information that connects, you're making a very immersive world for your players to live vicariously through their player characters in a place that seems to make sense, that has consistencies, and that is offering revelation over the course of the story. So let's go with this, right? Let's go with the characters are about to be overcome by a sudden, if not plotted, right? Because there's bad guys about. There are things that are happening. Magic exists. There's this white dragon that's out there causing a fuss. Even if it's not the main villain, it's still there. The characters are about to be overcome by a sudden polar vortex and must quickly find shelter, else succumb to the cold. They find refuge in one of the president's art projects. A giant dwarf. It sounds like an oxymoron. A giant dwarf holding aloft this new civilization. While inside, they fall into one of the sunken city rooms with no immediate way or need to leave. They hear a scream and are drawn into the dungeon further. During the course of the dungeon, the party will come to know the master of this realm, the undead dwarf, as well as its connection to the current president of the Confederacy. along the way, they can also learn that the vagrant has been stealing drawings for a while to paint and sell above until he was just recently captured. There we go. Grendel could have the local gaming establishment against him for debts. Can make this mob gangsterish and quest the dragon, but find out that the dragon is the crime boss. It's possible. You know, we never really... we've said that due to this odd nature of having an active swamp in an Arctic zone, what could cause that? Well, dragons have this effect on the landscape around them. And so we threw it out there that there could very well be a white dragon somewhere in the area that's causing this to occur. Or it's honestly just geothermal activity that's taking place in an Arctic climate, or it could be both. So in our planning, in our campaign planning, or, I mean, I guess planning is a tough word. We're going to be planning tomorrow. In our discussions about what ifs and maybe so's, we had considered that a dragon could exist, but we haven't fleshed it out in any capacity. It doesn't mean, though, Grendel, that it can't be exactly as you say. And it could just be a neutral party, or honestly, it's a force in the area, but maybe it's just not an active force. People could go seek it out if they want to try and kill it, talk to it, or something. But it's not necessarily the primary concern of the dragon about what's going on with the elves, humans, dwarves, or the giants even that are coming and stirring up some trouble. What level are we talking? We don't know. It doesn't necessarily matter even. Because we're talking story, we're talking content here, and there's a lot of ways that we can adjust or explain something to fit whatever considerations we would need. For example, if we're going high level and we say that this is a level 17 dungeon, well, by that point you probably have a magic caster or two in your party, and they probably know teleport, or you have a cleric with word of recall, I believe, in all this, and you could say, well, sure, you know, as a DM, you can either say, I want you to go through the dungeon either directly, or you say, this unnatural snowstorm is causing some sort of magical static, and it seems like magic will not work outside of the area you're in because it's sheltered from the snow. That's causing like it's like a magical chaff grenade that's gone off. And so you could either blatantly say to your players, you're in this dungeon, and run it. You could very strongly hint at it, like you're stuck here until the snow goes away. So move along. Or you could, if you don't want any of that, as a DM, you could say, so you fall into this underground area. You know, it looks like part of the old dwarven city, and all the players go, oh man, that's really boring. I really like what we were doing above. Teleport out or climb out because they're super strong, or they have really good gear, or something along those lines. And okay, that happens, and what do you do? As a DM in that case, you could either continue the events of the dungeon without the player's interference, or if you really need the events to occur and you want to try and dangle it, you know, in front of them again, you could apply the circumstances in a different capacity. I'm a fan of consequences because it makes DMing so much easier. And it takes your personal bias, or it takes your ego off of the table if your players don't bite into some bait that you set out for them without being obvious and railroading them, into a decision. Which, hey, sometimes railroading can occur. Because you know what would happen in this case? Your players would skip the dungeon, and the vagrant would be found dead, perhaps, the following day. And no one, he didn't freeze to death. He didn't die in this polar vortex. There was a murder, but at the same time, he's a vagrant. Does anyone care? Do your PCs care? Well, now, this vagrant could have had a big clue about what's going on. Oh well. And the PCs skip their own content in order to pursue something else that they're enjoying. And if they're enjoying the story, even if it'll lead to kind of a tragic end, you're playing D&D. If everyone's having fun, or if they learn of consequences that carry forward, if your players know that you are going to enforce consequences for decisions, and they trust that you are a fair mediator of said consequences, then it's a good way for you to have a check on the players. A swamp in the middle of the cold. A lover spat between a black and white dragon over an ancient sunken dwarven art museum. Yeah, because we did entertain that, hey, right, there's these two ruined obelisks. Maybe one is to each of them. And it kind of symbolized them breaking up or whatnot. So there could very well be, these people living here are their child, but of course, we have like two ancient dragons, and they just want to sleep all the time anyway, until they don't. And so yeah, we could get all sorts of explanations or phenomena for this. So, all right, we have an idea that fits into our setting, that fits into the players, that fits into the culture, and that fits into the NPCs and the villains that we've already rolled up so far. I think we're doing pretty well for ourselves in planning out our dungeon. And we haven't even had to boggle our mind over, well, what are the contents of this room? And how long should I make this hallway? Those are details that we'll get to, but don't freak out about it. Well, the art dwarf is an undead. It'll be a villain. And as we're talking about Grendel, what lies beneath the swamp is a dwarven city that was here first. It sank into the swamp, and a lot of them just sort of sealed off tunnels and just like dug into other parts in order to get out of the cold and to escape the sinking into the swamp. And so this villain is someone who in life really liked gambling. And so he was kind of like the band on the Titanic, although instead of, the band playing on as the ship sunk, he continued to gamble as the city sunk. And so even in death, he is driven by greed and this need to, sort of like explore. Like he has his domain, right? He has his casino that he's built himself, if only to try and entertain himself. And keep that compulsion alive. We could even say that, he has like dice for eyes and they spin, and the results of that will influence his mood or something along those lines. And so that's what the dungeon we're planning is going to be, is the PCs are going to find themselves in this dungeon of this undead's casino, in this dwarven ruin. And they're not going to be able to go because there's this blizzard outside. And as we randomly rolled, there is someone that they could possibly even save. Whether or not they gave any sort of credence to the vagrant that they met on the way into town, he's still down here, and they'll figure out something. That he's a good painter, but he hasn't been really painting the things that he's been selling. And that could mean that by the end of the dungeon, they could have some leverage over him. So not only can they walk out with some treasures that were won from the casino dungeon, they can also walk out with some credibility, right? Because they helped out someone who is in need, and or leverage over someone who knows a lot of information about maybe even the underbelly of this place, and might be able to help give them leads. Because for a man who has no home and who is brutally honest about everything he has to say, because what does he have to lose, being owed a favor from someone like that, I think could really be powerful. Okay. For the most part, aside from the minutia of if you want to randomly generate everything that's inside your dungeon, beep, 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 it's right up here. It's all in the DMG. If you don't want to draw it and think it out yourself, which you can do, believe in yourself to do it. Just sit down and start drawing rectangles and squares and connect it, right? Just challenge yourself. Take a handful of dice. Actually, just take the. Shoot, I don't have one. I don't have one next to me here. Take a polyhedral set, okay? And I want you to take all 7 dice on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I want you to go. And I want you to let the dice fly onto the paper. Now, I want you to draw a room in the shape of each of the dice where they landed. And I want you to make that your dungeon. And challenge yourself. What's here? Why is it here? Right? If you want a random prompt, try that. Take your polyhedral set of dice and boo, that's your dungeon. And you fill it in. Now that we have our concept, though, I do want to give you a conceptual guide. We don't need to get into architecture and a lot of the minutia, at least not with what we're doing right here and now. We can save that for another stream if we want to go through actually constructing a dungeon physically and get into which side of the door the hinge is located on. Because that can make a big difference in things. Oh, do I have that, let me make sure that I... So here's this. And then a... Okay. Here we go. I want you all to regard this checklist. Hey, Angel, or Angelus M.I. Aha, I remembered. I wish I had your level of creativity. Oh, look, Angelus, all this came over years and years of playing D&D, you know, just reading books, watching movies, just living life. It happens. You know, and all of this comes from you as a human being. But, you know, don't worry about my level of creativity because you can do this too. Angelus, if you want to take me up on my challenge, grab an 8.5 by 11 and put it portrait or landscape. Take your dice and boo, cast them. And now that you don't have to trace them, if you want to make like, you know, if your D6 falls somewhere, then make a larger room. And then you challenge yourself to make in fact, you challenge yourself to make this dungeon. And yours is going to look different, but it's going to function similarly. A lot of Mountain Dew. All right, so I want us to go over the dungeon checklist here, okay? I forget, this site might have a couple PG-13, bendy words, but we'll get to it here. This is an amazing site that I would like all of you, if you need inspiration, I want you to reference this. In fact, I don't know if any of you were here when the channel was just starting out. I had a list of links and links and links and links that were all sorts of, down below was all sorts of references for you all. But I got some feedback. It was a little overwhelming and it kind of made things look cluttery. So I ended up kind of scraping that off, and I was just going to bring it up whenever I reference it. But let's take a little wit and wisdom, right, from others who've done this before as well. Read it once before you write your dungeon, then read it again when you're done to make sure you have everything. So, number 1, something to steal. Treasure gives players a reason to go into the dungeon in the first place. On a metagame level, treasure's money, money's experience, and experience is tied to the idea of character advancement. It's the prime mover of the system. Now, that may not always be the case if you play with milestones, but just roll with the reference. 2 points. First, remember that treasure doesn't need to be treasure. It could be shiny stuff, such as boring old coins, or the jeweled brazier of the zombie queen. Knowledge, such as where to find more treasure or information you can use to blackmail the king, or even a sage who can answer a single question honestly. Friendship, such as an amorous purple worm that follows you around and protects you when it's hungry and a little bored. Occasionally, it leaves egg sacs lying around for you to, well, enjoy, I suppose. Trade goods, like a wagon full of tea worth 10,000 gold. And a personal note from the writer here, when I give out large parcels of trade goods as treasure, I give half of the XP now, and the other half of the XP when it's sold off. Territorial, like a tower the players can claim as their own, or an apartment in a nice part of the city. Or useful adventuring stuff like a magic sword, a scroll of blot out the sun, or a parachute. Second, treasure tells a story, too. Cover your treasure in religious symbols, anoint it in troll blood. Don't let your coins be coins. Right? You can... Hey, Katie, welcome. And Doomfish, thank you so much. I hope that your game finished out and that you all had a lot of fun. It was great popping in and watching you play. Okay, yeah. Be well, Doomfish, thank you. Meme Drag, howdy to you. Welcome, we are making a dungeon. So, we want to make sure that in our dungeon, right, we have our concept. We know our setting, and we even have our villain. And, what's going to happen, right? Our goals, hide from an outside threat and rescue a captive. We made the villain last night, and we already made the setting going back even into last week, as we're doing this organic story building process. So, we want to make sure that there's something in here, something to steal. Something, like an Indiana Jones style, oh, there's a glitter, you see a shiny bit in the wall. Because it's a mystery. All right, 2. Something to be killed. This is pretty obvious. Of course there are threatening things in the dungeon. There has to be some sort of challenge, otherwise it isn't a dungeon. The simplest way to do that is with things that are trying to kill you. Yes, you can have monsterless dungeons based on traps. Those are cool, but that's why this checklist is written in pencil, not in stone. There are many ways to make combat with even basic monsters more interesting. Also, remember that dungeons tell their story through nouns. The history of a dungeon is usually relayed through monster choices. Why use orcs when you can use degenerate cannibal versions of the original dwarven inhabitants? And descriptions of those creatures. A barnacle-covered zombie, an iron golem charred by dragon fire, the elven armor scraps that the goblins are wearing, the elven wand rifle that one of the goblins has for some reason. Can treasure be non-material? Yes, it can be information, or it could be a goodwill or a reputation that they get for having succeeded in the dungeon in some way. Steal non-patented ideas. So there could be intellectual. Actually, you know what, Meme Drag? One of the basis, or one of the concepts that we had here was that an NPC we generated prior was actually stealing drawings from the boss of the dungeon. And he was going and painting over top the drawings, and he was selling those paintings for income, and people were saying, oh, you're a magnificent painter. When in fact he was actually stealing intellectual property, albeit from an undead gambler in his sort of haven. All right, numero 30. Something to kill you. Dungeons are designed to be beaten. That's why we don't fill them with inescapable obstacles. Rocks fall, everyone dies. Or impenetrable barriers. Sorry, the whole dungeon is wrapped in an adamantine dome. You can't get in. But dungeons need to feel like they were designed to be unbeatable. It's important to feel like this isn't just a bowling alley where the DM sets up the pins for the players to knock down. You need to have deadly elements in your deadly dungeon for it to feel deadly. Deadly. Just follow 2 important rules. Try to follow at least 1. Label your deadly stuff as such. A sleeping dragon. A door barricaded from the player's side with a sign warning of deadly spiders. These things look deadly from a distance. And a chance to escape. Maybe the dragon can't fit into the smaller tunnels around his lair. Maybe the manticore is chained to a rock. Both of these serve the same function. They allow the players to pick their own battles, something you can't do on a linear railroad game. And you'll notice I used that terminology earlier. I think that's why a lot of old school Renaissance folks hate the idea of boss battles, because they're the one battle in the dungeon that's required. Horrible monsters that are avoidable give the players agency and allow them to be architects of their own demise. On a side note, I think that nearly all combat should be escapable, sometimes with a cost, dropping food, gold, maybe a dead PC or hireling. In my experience, PCs will get themselves killed often enough, even if the enemies never left the rooms they were in. Also, putting quote-unquote unbeatable monsters in your dungeon also allows the dungeon to be self-scaling. The level 1 party will just tiptoe past the dragon, while the level 6 party might consider fighting it so they can steal the treasure it is sleeping on top of. And just like that, a dungeon becomes appropriate for both level 1 parties and level 6 parties. And this is another reason why I think OSR games have such a wide range of level appropriateness. It's both easy and expected that players will flee from fights that they can't win. Remember that, everyone. You don't always have to fight in D&D. Running away or going for a non-kill or a stealth operation can very much be an option. And I will make a general statement and say a DM worth her or his salt can adapt to that sort of situation that you are going through. Delcorin hobbles in the chat, does a Wonka style roll. I hope we have our golden tickets handy. Yeah, there you go, Grendel. Tomb of Horrors flashback. Even the treasure was bad news. Dark Souls style mimics. Oh, remember the I think they were the scarabs in the Mummy. The scarabs, if I recall correctly, didn't they look like they had kind of a golden carapace, so they looked like gold coins. And when you went to reach for the pile of gold, the scarabs woke up and they like burrowed under your flesh. Touch nothing but the lamp. Now, this is another big one here as well. Different paths. That's right. They looked golden. Your DM told you it looks like a pile of gold coins. Not fighting is an option. Right. I've died many times in 7 attempting to flee. You just didn't hold the bumpers down long enough, or buffer your subpixels, or manipulate your RNG invincible frames. Alright, different paths allow different parties to experience the dungeon in different ways. It's a randomizer, similar to what you'd get if you ordered the dungeon rooms according to a random number generator, and it keeps you, the DM, from getting bored. Player agency. Players can choose the path they're better suited for. The party with 2 clerics can take the zombie-infested tunnel, and the party with air support can get themselves dropped into the courtyard. It also allows dungeons to be a little bit self-adjusting too. Players who are more confident can challenge the front door, while lower-level parties will creep around the outside. It allows parties to walk away from rooms they don't like. Part of the OSR philosophy, as I see it, is the ability to walk away from fights. If a party doesn't want to fight a room with archer skeletons entombed in the walls, especially after 2 of them were blinded in the last room, they can retreat and find another way in. It's an option they have. The last reason to have multiple paths is to allow for dungeon mastery. It doesn't mean DMing. I mean that, as the players learn more about the dungeon, they become better at exploiting its geography. They can lure the carrion crawler over the pit trap that they know is there. They can retreat into a looped path instead of retreating into unexplored rooms. Always a dangerous tactic. At the same time, don't throw in random paths just for the heck of it. The more paths you put in, the less linearity there is to your dungeon. And sometimes you want linearity, especially when it comes to teaching your players things or giving clues. Sometimes you want to show the players the eerily clean hallway before they bump into the gelatinous cube. Maybe you want them to meet the zombies with hook hands before they meet the room of crawling animated hands. There's nothing wrong with a little linearity if you're putting it in there for a reason. I still think that a heavily branched dungeon should be the default assumption, but linear sections of a dungeon are a venal sin, not a mortal one. Yeah, Gnome Sapper, what wall? Someone to talk to. People forget this one, and yet it's the one I feel strongest about. Strong enough for caps lock. Every dungeon needs someone to talk to. It's a role-playing game. NPCs are the cheapest and easiest way to add depth to your dungeon. It's easy because everyone knows how to roleplay a generic goblin prisoner and has a pretty good idea of what information or services that goblin prisoner can provide. And it's got depth because there are so many ways that a party can use a goblin prisoner. There's almost no bloat. You don't need to invent new mechanics, and it takes almost no space to write, quote, "There is a goblin in a cage. His name is Zerglum, and he has been imprisoned by his fellows for setting rats free." The problem is that a lot of dungeons are treasure vaults, tombs, and abandoned mines. The only creatures you usually encounter in those places are undead, golems, oozes, and vermin with ambiguous food chains. None of those are really known for being chatty. So here are some options. A rival adventuring party. Goblins never need explanation. A spell effect, like a chatty magic mouth spell or something. A graveyard nymph. Ghosts. Make a sympathetic one. Everyone expects them to be jerks. A ghoul head sitting on a shelf. It can talk if you blow through its neck hole. An old man trapped in a painting, communicating by painting. Demon trapped in a mirror, communicates by repeating your own phrases back at you. An ancient war machine trapped by a stasis field bomb seeks enemies who died thousands of years ago, will self-destruct when it learns that it has lost the war. Consider giving your players speak with stones or speak with lock spells. Dungeons usually have those. A demonic succubus who has spent the last 1,000 years on a bed trapped by the silver threads woven into a circle on the bedsheet. A pterodactyl riding barbarian who is looting the place. A time-displaced wizard caught in a paradox while exploring the place. Resets every 3 minutes. We haven't built the dungeon yet. And are you already starting to get ideas for the dungeon? Heck, we're not even done with this list. Is this helping you? Yeah, a sassy ghost? Yeah, and the ghoul head is clever, isn't it? Want linearity? One extremely long hallway. Exactly, exactly, meme drag. All right, next up. Something to, I guess, why am I capitalizing? Experiment with. Aside from something that will probably kick the party's butt, I think this might be the most OSR, which is old school Renaissance. OSR-ish. These are the unexplainable, the weird, and the unknown. And I don't mean unknown like an unidentified potion is unknown. I mean something that introduces a new wrinkle to the game. Hey, Daily, welcome. A room with 2 doors of different sizes. Anything that is put into the small door emerges from the large door at twice the size and vice versa. Anything that goes through the doors twice in the same direction, double enlarged or double shrunk, has terrible consequences. A pedestal. If anything is placed atop it, it turns into its opposite. Okay, the opposite of a sword is an axe, but what's the opposite of a banana? A metal skeleton. If a skull is placed atop it, a speak with dead spell is cast on it. Wishing wells that are portals to other small ponds in the dungeon. Where the portal goes is determined by what item you throw in the well before you jump in. Copper coins, silver coins, gold coins, gems, and arrows all lead to different places. 2 doorways. Impassable when you walk through a single one, but if 2 people walk through them simultaneously, they are fused together and transported to a city of similarly fused people. A machine that turns finished products into raw goods and raw goods into ammunition. A sundial that controls the sun. A boat golem that flees from loud noises. You can direct it by standing at the back of it and shouting. 2 holes in the wall. If 2 limbs are put in the holes, they're swapped. If only 1 limb is put in the hole, it is severed. Can be used to graft new limbs onto amputees. Right? So what is some, like a little mystery, something that's fun. It could lead to a trap even. Some sort of like Goonies, like the pirates, One-Eyed Willie's Pirates, leaving traps in the caves. It could be interesting, like the organ that needed to be played in order to proceed. But it's something interesting that they can experiment with. And you know what? If you so happen to have a character that can play an ancient pipe organ, maybe they do well in a role, and you give them a small reward, not just plunging them into a pit of pointed sticks, of punchy sticks, spikes. Right? There's some overlap here with magic items. There's some overlap with non-magical stuff too. There's also some overlap with combat because some combats can be puzzly or rely on new rules or victory conditions. So it'll continue, and you can read that should you wish. But I believe I made the point. I got the point across here. And lastly, but not leastly, something the players probably won't find. This one might be contentious. What puts stuff in your dungeon that why put stuff in your dungeon that players won't find? First, you don't have to put much in the dungeon, just a few words here and there to reward the players who are more thorough. Inside the purple worm stomach is a bag of holding full of 1,000 gallons of purple worm stomach acid. Or, quote, the pirate captain has a gold bar hidden in his peg leg, wrapped in felt so that it won't rattle. It's not like you're designing multiple cool rooms that no one will ever get to enjoy, although you can do that sometimes. I think it's important to hide things because there's a sincere joy in exploration and testing the limits. If all of the things in a dungeon are obvious, why bother wondering what's at the bottom of the well? Is there anything interesting buried beneath all the mud? Players who don't have the time or resources to explore a dungeon 100%, and they shouldn't, will always walk away with a feeling of enormity, that there was always more to find. Sure, completion is a nice feeling, but so is wonderment. I like to reward people who are good at the game, and being good at finding things, thinking about where they might be, exploring those places despite the risk, is one of those ways that a player can be good at D&D. It should be a spectrum. Some things, most things, should be out in the open. Some stuff should be hidden behind curtains, and some stuff should be tucked deeply away in the dungeon's folds. So yeah, the next time you decorate a room with a mural of a defeated king presenting tribute to his conqueror, be sure to put an actual treasure chest in the wall behind the painting of a treasure chest. I've run that dungeon 3 times, and no one has ever found it. I get a little excited every time I describe it to my players. There's also undead skeletons entombed in the wall behind the paintings of skeletons. No one's ever found them either, but someday, some party with the right alloy of greed, cleverness, and patience will find them, and it will be great. So, these are the things that we should consider. We have the theme of our dungeon. We have our villain. We have the person we need to rescue, who's an NPC that we're already considering the party to have met on their way into this campaign. Are we caught up in the minutia of should the room be 30 feet by 30 feet, and should it be a cube, or should I make a cylindrical room? No. That will come, okay? Are we talking about obscure D&D mechanics where we're calculating the challenge rating of traps and we're balancing that against the known hit point pool of our entire party and their ability to cure in a limited space? No. We've mentioned D&D, but I don't really think we've ever said that this is D&D exclusive. You have this inside of you to do, to make a compelling dungeon. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be a big dungeon. It doesn't have to be... Oh, do I have it handy in reaching distance? It doesn't have to be this. 15 levels of dungeon. I mean, yes, but no. You know what'll make a good dungeon? Besides these concepts to consider? Yeah, a swirling sandpit that'll spit out the ceiling of the same room. That could be very interesting, meme. I want to take you over to the concept of a 5-room dungeon. Hey, Shawnee Cage. It doesn't have to be a lot of dungeon. Let's go over a 5-room dungeon. Consider it, and then we'll make our dungeon based on all the considerations. Ready? And by the way, it doesn't even just have to be like literally 5 rooms. It can if you really want. Dungeons don't have to be, 10 levels of crawling through, like Diablo 3 sort of stuff. With these 5 steps, you can tell a compelling story through a dungeon that can be a one-shot, or it could just take a couple sessions. As long as you're presenting these 5 scenes, which is kind of like saying, well, a room, right? A 5-room dungeon. 5 scenes. There's are going to be 5 rooms in this dungeon. Most interesting TED Talk. So here we go. An entrance with a guardian. There has to be a reason why nobody else has come here before. It's difficult to get to, it's hidden, there's a guard posted outside, or a foreign big nasty decided the entrance makes for a good lair. something only heroic types could overcome. An antagonist right away gets the player's excitement up and gets the dice rolling. So the entrance is trapped. There's multiple entrances, but only one is correct. The entrance requires a special key or ceremony, such as speak friend, to enter. A guardian was deliberately placed at the entrance, a golem, guard dog, a nightclub bouncer. This isn't just for D&D and in fantasy. You can run this in a modern setting in sci-fi as well. These are universal. A hidden ambush waits in the shadows, or a portcullis that the kobold guards can pass through easily, but the heroes must expose themselves to lift. Right? So in this case, a guardian is it could be a trap or a wall, or it could actually be a guardian in the form of a guard that is aligned with whatever faction is using this place, or it is something that just took up residence. You know, you got to try and get into an old warehouse in Vampire the Masquerade, and you know, the back entrance, which is your best one to go through, has an alley dog that's sleeping there, and it seems to notice that something is amiss, and you got to get through this savage dog. So come back here. Five rooms. One, entrance with guardian. Two, a puzzle or role-playing challenge. For those whose characters aren't the fighting types, the next area shows off the skill points they'd spend in diplomacy or spot checks. This pleases the players who didn't pick rangers and barbarians and breaks up the pace a bit before getting back to the rawr. Be sure to allow for multiple solutions, because playing the guess what I'm thinking game is boring for players. Once you figure out the puzzle here, go back to room 1 and put some clues. So for instance, a chessboard floor with special squares, a hallway of colored portals with an odd riddle telling them which way to go. A corrupt city official can give the permits to enter the radiation sector. An apartment building has buzzers for tenants, but the quarry is using an assumed name. The chamber of the Ark is covered in venomous snakes that will shy away from open fire. Or the floor is covered in pressure plates for dart traps that kobolds are light enough to ignore. Next up, a trick or a setback. This is where you raise the stakes. Something about the plan has gone wrong. Something the opposite of what they expected. Maybe the NPC they brought along gets kidnapped. Maybe they fight the big bad, but it's actually just a minion pretending. This room is good for giving your players a second dose of fighting or puzzle, whichever they prefer. This is also a good opportunity to get players to waste some resources that could be useful in the big fight in room 4, such as using up their flaming oil on a troll when a mummy is the BBEG, big bad evil guy. So the hostages they rescued demand or plead to be taken back immediately before the heroes can find the villain. You found the Lich's lair, but he seems awfully weak, and isn't he a demi-lich? Contains a one-way exit, dumping the room back outside of room 1. The heroes found the data they need to steal, but it's encrypted, and the passwords are further inside. One of the NPCs that came along takes the magic dingus for himself and runs off. Or the heroes walk right into kobolds, playing a sport with swinging boulders from the high ledges. Now, we arrive at the big climax. Here's the ringleader, the goblin chieftain, the big kahuna. Big O, it's showtime. Spend more of your effort on tactics, set pieces, and showy effects on the fight in this room, because this is what the adventure module is named after. Make a detailed map with interesting terrain and usable props for jumping or tripping over, grabbing, swinging. Start or end with some acting. Maybe the boss needs to stall to finish repairing or to allow for reinforcements. Maybe there's a hapless minion to toy with while their leader falls. The big bad is going to have powers that is beyond the monsters and traps encountered up until now. The lair is trapped and only the BBEG knows how to get around the room safely. Previous rooms might have clues for the weaknesses of the main villain. The evil guy has the holy what's-it in his grasp and threatens to destroy it. The kobold chief has a magic staff, a pet that steals players' gear, and a rolling boulder trap that his followers can avoid by climbing ledges and using ranged attacks. Oh, yep. Oh, Delcorin. Hey, your luck's back, right? Shawnee Cage, we're making our own dungeon, and so we're going over considerations for you to, well, to consider as you are going to, as you go on to make your own, as you play D&D. Then finally, boop-a-doo, reward and revelation. Here's where you sucker punch the players. The big fight is over. Time to pat each other on the back for another great job. Or is it? It doesn't have to be an actual fifth room. It could just be a plot twist that reveals itself after the big fight in room 4. Maybe the players will find the plot hook to the next adventure, or clues about a major plot arc over the campaign. Or maybe the real villain will reveal himself and twirl his mustache. A trap is sprung, which reanimates the big guy from room 4. Bonus treasures uncovered, which leads elsewhere, such as a part of a treasure map or a deed to some land. After being weakened by the fight in room 4, the bad guy uncloaks from following the heroes and snatches the what's-it. The captured princess wasn't kidnapped, but ran away from home to elope with the bad guy. The true gruesome meaning behind a national holiday is discovered. The alien's language is deciphered, revealing that the hostilities was all just a misunderstanding. A prophecy comes true, but not the way the players expected. Or the kobold chief was pressured into raiding the human villages by a young white dragon who demanded tribute. And so the whole time, they didn't really want to pick on people, but they themselves were bullied. But now are they even alive to regret that? And, by the way, there's a link down here. Here's a bunch of 5-room dungeons already made up for you in case you wanted some inspiration yourself. But you know what we're going to do? We have the inspiration. And I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. Let's go back to what we had just talked about. You know, our initial... This is my 1-minute pitch. You know, I'm the pitch man, you are the Hollywood producers, and this is... I want you to fund my movie. And so I'm going to tell you the premise of the movie. Okay? So, the characters are about to be overcome by a sudden, if not plotted, polar vortex and must quickly find shelter, else succumb to the cold. They find refuge in one of the president's art projects, a giant dwarf holding aloft this new civilization, a statue. While inside, they fall into one of the sunken city's rooms, with no immediate way or even need to leave. They hear a scream and are drawn into the dungeon further. During the course of the dungeon, the party will come to know the master of this realm, the undead dwarf, with a gambling problem and a curse beyond it, as well as its connection to the current president of the Confederacy. Along the way, they can also learn that the vagrant has been stealing drawings for a while to paint and sell above until he was just recently captured. How much of what you see over here have we just filled in with our 1-minute pitch? And also, would you fund my movie, please? Nope, it's all trash. It'll never fly. It'll never fly. It'll never fly, I tell you. It'll never fly. Now I'll tell you, my niece is an aspiring actress, and I bet she could pull this bird up into the sky again, if you're willing to consider her for the lead role. I said that before you even finished, just like Hollywood would. Again, have we measured out the power of a flame jet and how many dice of damage it's done? Have we needed to reference obscure, uh, you know, obscure charts or something? Not at all. Comes from here, comes from here. So, let's take a look. Someone to talk to? Vagrant. Let's see. Something to steal? The gambler's loot. Something to be killed. If we want to go outside of what the big boss is going to be, something that can be killed down here could also be another monster that was harassing or even giving this undead some trouble. It could even be like a gelatinous cube, right? It wants to go through and it just eats up whatever's left out there. So this turns him into a hoarder. Pardon. It could be a rat problem. It could even be that he has such was his will, right? He died as the dwarven city was sinking into the swamp, that others might have been reanimated as a part of his strong desire. And so there actually could be other patrons in this place, undead patrons. And maybe they don't take to losing so kindly, and yet the party must be victorious in order to get to the next room or to make progress through this casino. I don't think we're necessarily making a casino heist as a dungeon, which, by the way, a casino heist would make for an excellent dungeon itself, especially if it's in a casino or on a riverboat or something along those lines. Daly says, is this rhetorical? I just really got here because if you need flame jets statted out, I would love to. It was rhetorical, Daly, because we're setting up the concept of a dungeon, and we haven't gone to the reference up above in the DMG here for that. Something to kill you. The traps or games of chance that the boss has laid throughout this casino. Also, different paths. Payday 2 D&D edition. If you have someone with a soldier background and they took dice rolling as their game of chance or a game of choice, and someone's a noble and they took 3 Dragon Ante, we're allowing for multiple paths, because maybe you offer 7 games and you say that you have to have 3 wins in order to proceed to the high rollers or whatever, whatever the next part of the dungeon is. And even beyond that, gambling can be on other things like foot races or combat, kind of a gladiatorial style combat. And so we're already including the concept of different paths that your players may want to take. Games of chance versus fighting or feats of strength. Someone to talk to. So there is the vagrant at the end if we want that person, or some sentient staff even, You know, maybe a lot of these lesser undead that died were only really brought back as either an illusion, they could just be an illusion, or they're sort of undead phantasms. They're mindless undead, but they go through the motions of rolling and acting out normally, but it's really just a program. They're a programmed ghost or a programmed illusion. Maybe some of the staff might still have memories and can offer a clue. A projected pit fiend as a pit boss daily. Can you... I'm not even going to ask, can you? Here we go. Because, Daily, it's a good thing you mentioned that. Oh, he's tussling with the stone giant. We're having an epic combat in your box here. Can you imagine this guy looking like a pit boss, wearing like a nice, like a button down, like a white Oxford shirt with a black vest? He's got his sleeves rolled up, and he might even have like black garters on his wings instead of like on his arms here. Comes through, nice shiny shoes, very well pleated pants. Excuse me, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I think you've had enough. Now, something to experiment with. The games. Or behind the curtain. Right? Stuff going on behind the curtain. There's all the obvious games. What about the bar? You know, what about the bar? Is there anything left in the cash register there? Is there, you know, is this like The Shining? Or The Shinin, if we don't want to steal intellectual property, like Groundskeeper Willie. There could be all sorts of odd effects if we're drawing necromancy or illusion into a dungeon. Right? So what would be an interesting... would it be this even? Remember, I invoked that Star Trek Next Generation episode where the crew, well, not the entire crew, where the away team was trapped inside like a 19th century casino. That was actually like a book. And it was the episode, it was Casino Royale or something like that. So what if when they... all right, our party... needs to seek shelter from this polar vortex. It's gonna snap freeze the the swamp. So they duck into one of these statues. That's one of the public works that's been going on, and of course you've built this up over the course of the campaign too by this point. And in so doing, they think they hear a distant "aye" or some sort of Wilhelm scream, and they explore and they go in, and then they find, you know, going through some old dusty tunnels and other things. You know, they go from natural rock formation to where it fuses to where this old dwarven city was. And everything is dusty and dirty and dingy. Until they get to some very large doors that look ancient but solid. And just beyond, perhaps where that cry came, they can hear voices. Yes, that's... Are people laughing? Are those drinks being poured? Dice being rolled? Music being played. And so what happens then for your PCs, who by this point you can describe they're covered in cobwebs and dirt. They probably have some frost starting to form on them because the bitter cold kind of chased them down the tunnel a little ways, and they could see their breath as they open the doors. warmth and light and the smells of cigars and liquor and the smells of perfumes roll out. And in a moment, you know, with the light suddenly, they close their eyes, and when they open them, they look around, and they've walked through the doors of this great dwarven casino. And as they look down, they're dressed like they're here for some business. They're dressed as nobles of the day. So, again, we're also going into dwarven history, right? We're going into culture and fashion and all this other stuff, food and drink. They look down and you know, where once there was like this dusty, cobwebby leather armor is now, you know, a beautiful, like corduroy, you know, violet jacket, you know, with leather patches or something like that. Or you're even a rebel. You're wearing a leather coat with tweed elbows. And suddenly everyone looks down and they're drawn into this. They look back and the doors are there, but they can't be opened or something. You know, some phantasmal barrier has sealed them in. And now the players are in the dungeon of this casino. And they may realize, in fact, they're alive and what they're wearing is real, but maybe everyone who's here and laughing appears to be just that. They're dead. They're skeletons, or they look kind of like mummified dwarves or people of other races. But they're clean, they're just diminished because their bodies have just been going through the motion. And so as you're describing, you know, you're going by what appears to be and this is a good marker too. And so we'll say an elven lady, right? Elves live 800 years and she's already long gone. How long has this been going on down here? As you pass by this apparently elven lady, you can have him roll a medicine check. She is wearing green sequins and a beautiful, like a peacock hat. And as she laughs, her jaw unhinges and seems to almost silently move on its own. And yet you hear, "Oh, I'll have to try again," in Elven. And now we're in this grim fandango, and we dance this tango. Yes, corduroy. Is this a Matty Morg's break? What do you mean a break, Daily? Oh, Hotel Royale. I'm sorry, not a casino. Well-dressed demons is always a good aesthetic, says Meme Drag. Yes, Bobicus. As I was describing this, did you all get this? Could you imagine this? If you were the party and I'm your DM and I just described this, did I do a decent job? Do you feel brought into something? Oh, that's... Yeah. So something like that, Daily, exactly. You should slap me for mentioning that dreadful fashion faux pas. Look, I'm not responsible for dwarven fashion and the fact that they love corduroy because it has a good texture to it. Something the players probably won't find? Well, I mean, if we're talking about the Star Trek episode, they may never have found that astronaut with the book. Something the players won't find. The body of the dwarven specter that is haunting this place with his greed, regret, and compulsion. And all the treasure that has amassed around it. That doesn't mean that they can't walk out of here with 1,000 gold pieces and winnings. It's just they'll probably never find the stash of 10,000 gold of gems that's with the actual body of this person. To complete, you know, that would be completing the tale. Like, yeah, you may banish the ghost. You know, they'll end up fighting the last boss of the casino, you know, as a ghost, and that's fine. Yay, the ghost is freed. But the ghost doesn't drop loot. And what happened to the body? Psst, you can put clues all around the casino, by the way. Pink tie with yellow dots all over it, and the tie is plastic too. High fashion, Delcorin. Hey, Neo Realms, welcome. A special token that's slightly different from the rest. Yeah, and maybe, oh, meme. Maybe that was actually the dwarf's. That was the coin or whatever that he always flipped. And so while everything else here appears pristine, except for the corpses, right? There's this one coin that seems worn and scratched. And you know what? You know how we're getting some of these aspects too? Look at the villain that we made for this. He paces. He could be argumentative. Right? He's pacing. He has this compulsion. Ping, ping. He's very a compulsive Two-Face here. If they find that, maybe that could be a clue too. Excellent idea, Meme Drag. He's got more than mere treasure. This guy played for high stakes with devils. He's got some soul gems. You could find that in there as well. In fact, maybe this bargain, maybe he was even partially responsible for the destruction or the sinking of the Dwarven city into the swamp. And so now we have our 7 things that should be inside the dungeon somewhere, that are more specifically laid out than the 1-minute pitch I gave you all as my potential movie producers. And so let's go to the 5 rooms concept. An entrance with a guardian. And so here we would have the dusty hall with the doors through which the casino lies. It doesn't have to be like a shield guardian that wakes up and beats them down. It can be a door. Now, there could also be, there could be something like because they're still in the real world before they enter in there, and some maybe there's a pack of rats or something, like a swarm of bats are disturbed by them traipsing through here, and so you could have that. So there's the doors that they have to get through, maybe a strength check or something like that. Before that, in the dusty real world hall, the party is harassed by a swarm of X. The Guardian demands that they offer some level of wealth, that they are ready to gamble, like changing your cash into... Oh. So yeah, so we could do that then. So the real world hall. And so what that could be then is an offer, because remember, different paths. If your party doesn't have, a gem worth 50 gold pieces, and they come down here and they're assaulted by a couple swarms of rats, or even giant rats. Well, maybe, just maybe, the rats stowed away a gem that could be used to pay, or a series of gems that could be used to pay, as Bobik has said, like the entrance fee. And so, let's see, so the Dusty Hall doors through which the casino lies. Before that, or in the Dusty Real World, harassed by a swarm of X. Gems may be found in the nests that can allow entry through the door's bouncer. The gems must be placed into the bouncer's hand to be admitted into the casino. Awesome. Awesome. Now, we move into the puzzle or the roleplay challenge. There's 10 games of chance in the pit. Which would you like to, indulge yourself? Have fun, play 3 Dragon Ante, chess, engage in gladiatorial combat with the defending champion. Again, multiple paths. We're still taking these considerations, right? And so you might have, Kronk the Barbarian who wants to arm wrestle, with Sylvester Stallone for custody of his kid, who's a trucker. Not the kid. Maybe he'll grow up to be. It's a noble profession. You can make a ton of money doing that, by the way. Anyway, that's a side note. So here, games of chance and a way to amass clues. What should the tokens they receive in return look like? I mean, so those are small details that we can fill in. What would they look like? Eyes? Would they, or would they look like ancient dwarven currency? Or would they just look like stones? Because maybe that's honestly what is really around everyone, despite the glamour that's been put up. And that could be a clue itself. Do your players just accept that they're handed yellow tokens? Or are they going to try and examine them and see if there's writing or something along those lines? Or if one of them got the special coin. Did they get this villain's coin? Did they get Scrooge McDuck's first dime? If it's a dwarven casino, they could be varying colors based on value. The stone with dwarvish inscriptions. Yeah, and so the pattern and the color changes based on the value. Exactly. Black obsidian permanently cold to the touch? Or is it always warm to the touch, so it's burning a hole in your pocket? A trick or setback? This is where you throw your players for a little bit of a loop. They won the initial challenges, but now must go to the high rollers area, where a more difficult and personal challenge begins. They re-enter the real world and navigate through the old, dusty ruins of the city that sunk so many decades ago. There could be some fights and more chances to explore and find clues. Ahead, another door awaits the tokens that they were given before leaving the regular floor. And maybe in the fight or in the traipsing through, the rats can get revenge. There's a chance of losing a token and they have to recover it in some way. That's going to be up to you as a DM. How long do you want to make this dungeon? Do you want to make it set, not set piece, but do you want to make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and bada boom, we're done? Or do you want this to last a month or two of sessions while they're exploring this area? Curse token. Oh, yeah, you can curse a token. Yeah. They could be blessed, possibly even. Do something for good luck, right? Reward some role playing. Data in that episode was able to. If you haven't seen that episode of TNG, then you might be missing a lot of, I guess, inspiration or a lot of motivation, or even just a lot of stuff I even am subconsciously referring to, without. Well, I mean, I'm doing it subconsciously. But yeah, he was able to do something to the dice in order to help facilitate a win. Yeah, Bobicus, moral challenges are very much something in your games, right? Offer the temptation. You can cheat. Maybe no one's looking. Maybe the pit fiend pit boss will never catch you. But what happens if you cheat? Will someone ultimately know? Will this ghost know? This is his illusion. This is his casino. And so now we have the big climax. This is going to be the big set piece fight with the spirit of the dwarf who runs this place. The stakes will be high, not just for treasure, but for the life of the vagrant the party met upon entering the Confederacy. Banter during the fight, as well as clues in the stage, can add RP to a difficult challenge, or I guess to a difficult fight. And so now we come to the reward and revelation. If we presume, and by the way, if we're always leaving a way to get out, this, he could very well say, "Run! You have no, you have no chances," or "I've calculated the odds of you beating me. You have only a 5% chance of beating me here." And maybe they run away. Maybe they want to go back and earn more tokens, as there's a shop in the casino that they could purchase armor or weapons or other things, and they can come back. And the Spectre will say, "Oh, you've you only have a 10% chance," and so you could make it this way as well. Or they could just be scrappy and say, "No, with the power of friendship, we're gonna beat you." But now it's time for the reward and revelation. The ghost is an ancestor of the current president of the Confederacy. History about the city is revealed, along with the connection, which could lead the party to meet this very influential NPC. As well, they learn about the vagrant stealing drawings to sell and gaining leverage over him as a source of information. This is also where the hidden body or treasure of the ancestor could be found. Or back in room 1. Because remember, this process wants us to go back, right? Think back. And so if they have all this, maybe they now have the chance. Maybe the whole time, the body of this person, in fact, you could even describe it. You know, in room 1 in the dusty real world, they pass by a rat's nest that looks like it might be built into a skeleton of a skeleton of a dwarf. And you know, even if they search the rat's nest, maybe nothing really happens there. But after they defeat the ghost of this person, they get an insight, or they get an object, or they can make a connection of some kind, where wow, that skeleton that we first came across, that's the guy. And thereby finding it, maybe they learn something, or there's a scrap of paper that, you know, wasn't visible until they go back. I mean, you could fudge it a little bit as a DM if you want. If your players are having fun and you're telling a story, be dramatic about it. You know, and if your player goes, but I rolled a 20 on perception, I should have seen a scrap of paper. Maybe, sure, if you even want to plan for that, then you don't understand the scrap of paper. It looks like a series of symbols. Who knows? Have fun with it. A trash-talking boss? Well, he is argumentative. And so he'd probably come across as kind of like a Scrooge McDuck, or even, what's his rival's name? Something McDougal? Something McDougal, I think, is his rival's name, who's like the second richest person in the world. Fluffy, never tell me the odds. Oh, yeah. There it is, Daily. The Royale. There you go. Yep, so that link is exactly what I was referencing. Awesome, Daily. Thank you for finding that. Flintheart Goldglum? Oh, okay. Flintheart Goldglum. Thank you, Fluffy. And it'll be a really good chance for you to work on your Scottish accent. To really just chew up your words and roll your R's. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a dungeon. Did you have to draw it on graph paper? Or on isometric graph paper even? Ooh, isometrics. Did you have to draw out an isometric or otherwise dungeon on a graph paper? Can you just narrate this to your players? This is a dungeon. This is 100% a dungeon. And have we talked about flame jets and spike traps? It's there. You could layer it in there, because you know what? There could be penalties for losing the games that they play. That's up for you as a DM to decide. You know, do they just lose tokens, or do they actually lose some blood? You know, what goes on? Do they lose a finger? But from everything we just went through in this practice, can you imagine this? Can you imagine this as a dungeon? Can you run this in your own campaign, even separate from the one that we're talking about with this Arctic swamp region? Which still needs a name, by the way. Meme says, if you find the token, whoever holds it when the dungeon is beat becomes bound to them, like the mask when Jim Carrey, and adds a +1. Oh, so maybe a little bit. Yeah, it could be like a cursed item. That could be another twist, right, with the reward and revelation, or as it comes down to even something to experiment with. Yeah, it will give you. It'll unlock access, but maybe there's a lingering curse of some kind. Maybe they'll be the next ones, as disaster falls this region, and is history doomed to repeat itself? Something like that. I like it, meme. I like it. All right, everyone. Congratulations. I mean, now we could draw it out, actually, which is kind of what I'm hoping to do in this next part. I set up, like, well, you could run it in Theater of the Mind, and you can. But why don't we now go through the details? If we don't draw it out, then we can talk about what type of games would be run. You know, what type of skill challenges would we have? And, you know, what would the flame jets be like? And go from there. So let's take a 10-minute break, get something to drink, get a snack, stretch, use the restroom, do what you got to do. And when we come back, let's populate our dungeon, because now we know what the dungeon is and how it works, why it exists, and all the really important stuff. After that, well, I mean, are they going to hit the flame jet? Who knows? But we'll stat it out, and we can take these things under consideration. Yeah, that could be it too, Bobicus. That this is like a liminality. This is a place of liminality. And so, yes, there's undead patrons, but also maybe this is a place where fiends of some kind, powerful devils, come because of this area, and so they gamble here as well, and they play by the rules, but there might be a lot of fine print in them. Kind of getting like an end of Cuphead kind of vibe. Anyway, let's take our break and come back.